Hello and welcome to another Fireside chat with Dragon Combat Club. We are a 100% volunteer run initiative and we've been offering community self-defense classes virtually since April 2020. I'm joined today by Henry, Stephen, and Milda. Go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Hi, my name is Milda. I've been with Dragon Combat Club since January of last year, initially invited by Henry. Started training, then slowly moved on to teaching the basics to newcomers. And I appreciate the opportunity to participate in these discussions and to learn. And I guess I can pass it off to Stephen.
Hi, I'm Stephen Trunker. I'm an anthropologist and I'm new to Dragon Combat Club and just started participating in trainings and getting to know everybody this week.
Hi, I'm Hen, alias Dr. Z. I've already introduced myself last week, my training background, and you know how I started. But sort of one extra caveat to add is that my fiance, and I are neighbors of Guayama, 10 blocks away. And to sort of make things hit even closer to home, her memorial is a block away from where we are. So, you know, we've been doing what we can to check on it to make sure that it doesn't get vandalized, which unfortunately has happened to the memorial of another Asian American woman murdered in Chinatown, Christina Unily. So yeah, this one has hit close to home as well.
So since we're jumping right into it, Henry, can you give us the details for both cases?
Starting with Guayama.
Let's leave that for a second. Let's talk about Michelle Go and Christina Unily and their specific circumstances, since some of the people watching this may not be aware fully of what had happened.
Okay, okay? All right. So, yeah, with 2022, there have been in New York City, 4 Asian Americans have died due to unprovoked attacks against them. And many of them have good reason to suspect that they are racially motivated. 3 of the 4 are women, and I'm just going to say their names. The first, Yao Pan Ma, he was the first to die. He actually died on the New Year's Eve of 2021, so right before 2022 started. He was actually attacked in April in Harlem. Was mistaken for Korean or Japanese, brutally stomped in the head, and he was in a coma for a while, and unfortunately he passed away from his injuries. The second murder in New York City was that of Michelle Go. This was the middle of January. This was in the Times Square station. She was born in California, moved here to New York City to work, was shoved in the subway where a subway into the tracks. Train ran her over. She is actually not the first Asian American in recent months to be shoved into the Times Square tracks. Another woman was shoved before. Luckily, the woman just survived many injuries. Michelle Go, unfortunately, did not survive. She was only 40 when her full name was Michelle Alyssa Go, and unfortunately, she was only 40, and she also passed. Only a few weeks afterwards, I think around mid-February, a fellow Rutgers alumni. I say this because I'm currently a student at Rutgers. Christina Unily, Korean American, lived in Chinatown, just the same block as Grand Street Station. Was followed into her home, stabbed 40 times. Stabbed 40 times. Was also sexually assaulted. And to make things even worse, her memorial has been vandalized multiple times. Which on Christian has been vandalized multiple times since the attack, with I think the 4th incident being just today. And finally, we have Wei Ying-ma, who was beaten by a rock while sweeping outside her house in Jackson Heights. This was during Black Friday, and we thought that she would recover at Elmhurst Hospital. We saw her open her eyes. My own fiance had actually designed a communication board for her so that she could blink to communicate her needs. Sadly, that never came to fruition because she would also pass away from her injuries about a week, I think, I think 1 to 2 weeks ago. So as you can tell, this has been very brutal for our community, and this is one of the reasons why we are talking about it today.
Yeah, so kind of like Henry had said, I actually went with Henry and Antonetta, who's Henry's girlfriend currently and fiance.
Yeah.
But some of the things that kind of rubbed me the wrong way is how many people were aware of what actually transpired. There was a couple of nurses who were passing by, and they saw a whole bunch of people, as well as the signs and flowers, cards, etc. And even though they work in that Elmhurst hospital, they had no idea what was going on. And and the whole reason kind of why we have these vigils is not only to spread awareness, but to also remember these folks for something that should have never happened in the first place, which of course is the deaths of AAPI. And it there is a lack of awareness in the community as well regarding what's going on. So hence we're also wanting to explain why these deaths occur. I want to open it up to the broader floor as well. How does this make you feel? Like just hearing about this in the news. My own personal thoughts, like a lot of people are getting desensitized now with everything that's going on, with all the AAPI women and elderly being targeted, especially, and ultimately to their demise. Stephen?
Yeah, well, we used to talk about this in a more like a professional sort of capacity, but just talking personally, like my mom's like 5 feet tall, like she's like older now, like that's just like that sort of personal way that I kind of like experience it. Like I don't really like worry too much about myself because like maybe that's like arrogant because like anybody's like no one's invincible, right? And I don't mean to suggest that I think I am or anything like that, but like that I think the pattern to a lot of these attacks has made it clear that like a clear part of it is people who are just clearly more vulnerable or people who are much more likely to be attacked in almost all cases. But yeah, I mean, like personally, when this stuff started happening, and there were attacks in New York and just incidents even before like that were not lethal to begin with, but were still very concerning. And I remember when I was there at the start of the pandemic, even times when I was around when I could see like conflict breaking out that probably wasn't going to make the news. I never saw anything like extremely dramatic, but it was still concerning to see people, singling out Asians on the subway, shouting at them and throwing in racial slurs, that kind of stuff, and just worrying like, what's going to happen to people that I know, who are older, who are definitely not able to like stand up for themselves, physically or for whatever reason, So that stuff just like weighs on me in a general sense. And then like these particular events, I'm not in New York right now. So this one like isn't physically close to me, but it still hits pretty hard. Yeah. I don't know. It's just, I mean, the last thing I want to say about it though, and I don't think that's anything new for the people who are on this call, but it's the gap between how much this concerns us and how little discussion there is of it, in sort of mainstream news discourse or however you want to frame it. It's upsetting to put it gently. It really is.
So I just find a lot of this really really draining, if that makes sense, because of course 4 people died this year, but these aren't like the first attacks directed towards Asian Americans. And after every attack, even if they do get mainstream media attention, or if they don't, we always see people being like, oh no, this is terrible. We need to stop this. This cannot happen again. And then it's like, yeah, everyone's going to do something. And then it happens again. And then you have the same response. Oh no, this is terrible. You know, we need to do something to stop this. But no one's really doing anything other than just like, you know, like saying that something needs to be done. And it just keeps happening again and again and again. And I'm like, okay, how many people need to die before, like, you know, concrete steps are taken or something more meaningful than, like, you know, just like, oh, thoughts and prayers, oh, this is so bad, oh, we must condemn it. It's like, yes, we need to do that too, but we also need to do other things. Like I said, it's just really draining because, like, it keeps happening over and over again and everyone recycles the same talking points, and it's like, okay, but there are no results. Yeah, and also kind of like just the lack of attention and just like the whole apathy. It's really annoying because, like, hey, one day, like, it could be someone else's grandma, it could be someone whom we personally know, it could hit much closer to home. I'm Lithuanian American, and for example, like, people tell me, like, people from in like the 1950s and 1960s, those from my community who grew up in the US, they were being beat up and attacked and called communists just because of where they're from. And I'm like, okay, yeah, we have one demographic one day, then the next day we have another one, then the next day we have a third one. Like, when is this gonna stop? Yeah, I think that's, I think I'm done for now.
Yeah, I mean, we're just having a fluid conversation, so no worries there. You know, what Milda had said is that this is not the first time any minority group in America has been, you know, kind of targeted in this way. You know, during World War II, we saw the same targeting against Japanese Americans because of anti-Japanese sentiment. And we're seeing kind of the repeat of history in that fashion today. A lot of, you know, people in America can't tell the difference between Japanese and all the other, you know, was it 68 other countries of Asia and all the sub minorities and subcultures that lie in there. There's a lot of difference there that most people, most Americans won't be able to realize, right? So, you know, I'm also reminded of what China Mac had said during the vigil. He showed up for like the last half an hour and he said, you know, this could be your mother, this could be your grandmother, this could be your aunt, this could be your sister. Like, take interest and notice what's going on. And unfortunately, Asians in America are a minority. So when, you know, big things like this do happen, unfortunately, they don't get enough movement, right? It's not noticed enough because at the end of the day, what are news companies there for? For viewership, it's for people to pay attention, people to be interested in clicking on those articles, right? So, Stephen, what is your background actually? What's your cultural background? And kind of building off what you said with your mother, right? She's 5 foot. Actually, my mom is like 5'2", and you know she has to go to work again in a few weeks. Like she works in Brooklyn, and I honestly fear for her. Right. So like, you know, I've been doing just like everybody else would, giving her safety gear, but it's not like she's at an age where she thinks that she can defend herself in a reasonable manner. Right. So I worry about, you know, as especially as we start moving back into an in-office setting, and people are now have to go back and have to take the subway and metro system. And I'm very concerned about the future of, you know, specifically AAPI women and elderly, not only here in New York, but also in a broader sense.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely share that same feeling. I mean, the stuff China Mac said like definitely resonated with me. But just as far as my own personal background, like my mom's from Saigon and came over here after the war as a refugee. But she's older now, and like, you know, not that I mean, like, size is a huge disadvantage in fights in general, right? Like if you're trained, you know that. But also she's just older now, so like I worry about it in that sense. But also like it you know, in general, it's not just like I'm not just only worried about my mom, right? Like there are other like there's a larger community that like if it's not your mom or your grandparents or whatever, it's someone else's, right? Yeah.
I mean, I think we can all agree that the onset of these kind of anti-Asian crimes have occurred because of COVID. Right? A lot of anti-Chinese sentiment, of course, the virus originating in China, in Wuhan, China, and a lot of anti-Asian sentiment therein lies because most Americans can't tell the difference between Chinese and all the other different parts of Asian culture. I personally I consider myself Asian American. I don't draw just from one culture, even though I was born and raised as an ABC, American born Chinese. Um, Technically, my parents are from Taiwan, so there's also that Chinese-Taiwan conflict too that I have to deal with. But there are struggles inherent within any Asian community, and it's difficult because it's an issue that's not even talked about within the community. So when was the last time, aside from people in New York, like actually crossing boundaries to go to the Thai or Viet community and saying these are the issues that we're experiencing in the Chinese community? Like, are are we able to help each other out? Not only just within the Asian community, but also within the Black and Asian community, right? Other minority groups.
It's a bit of a. I've I've had difficult figuring out as to like who cares and who doesn't. I think I give I've sometimes I've come to realize that like a person's ethnic background doesn't determine if they care or not. Everyone who knows my background knows that. I've met many Chinese Americans who flat out don't care, who will say things like, this is who will either say nothing or they'll say, this is horrible, but, and of course, this is like the reaction that will cause everyone to roll our eyes. And then on the flip side, I've also met many Black Americans and also like a lot of Afro-Latinos, Afro-Latinas, folks, from Latin America who seem to understand what we're going through, who are able to kind of help us articulate like our struggle in a way that doesn't like minimize their, and I appreciate their presence a lot. And recently I've reached out, we've reached out to many folks, many Filipino and Filipino Americans who have also expressed many similar concerns as well. And that's not to say that everyone from those other groups are sympathetic. As we know, have been many Asian American groups that are like, we're not Chinese. This isn't going to happen to us, only for it to sadly happen to them. So, like, I've always asked myself, like, what is the determining factor for someone to care? I'm thinking it's proximity, where you live, right? Where you live, your class. If you are of a certain background, but you don't live near any Asian Americans, right? And you live in like the metaphorical ivory tower, you don't have to care. This is all an abstract discourse to you where you have to win, where you don't have to answer the question of how we're going to live. And I think that is what seems to, proximity and class and how much you just care for your fellow friends or people in that area. I think those are like the three things that seem to drive who's willing to help and who's willing to care versus who doesn't. And I think that matters so much more than just race or any other abstract marker.
So I do agree that I do agree with Henry's statement that well, sorry, I agree with Dr. Z's statement that that your race and like background like who's going to respond, who's going to care depends on much more than just race and just cultural background. And also, like, with some of these attacks primarily being concentrated, I want to say, in the East Coast and the West Coast, they're like people who live really far, just like distance wise, and they're like, yeah, no, we're not gonna have anything happening here. Oh, it's so far away. Oh, too bad for them. But I mean, we all kind of live in a society, and my mindset sometimes is maybe a bit more collective, because if we do live in a society, we can't be really too individualistic and be like, oh yeah, this doesn't affect me, I shouldn't care, because at the end of the day, you never know when it will turn around and when it will affect us all. But because we do live in a society, I do think we have some sort of moral responsibility to, or moral obligation to look out for everyone. So this whole sentiment of like, oh yeah, I'm from the outside, oh, it's so far away. Like, yes, you have the privilege not to care, but again, we do have the responsibility to sort of like look out for each other. Like, hey, if my house was on fire and I wasn't home, I would want my neighbors to call the fire department. Okay, it's not like, oh, not my house, not my problem, you know. I'm sorry, that's a little ramble, but yeah.
No, the rambles are appreciated, right? Like, a lot of these people that I've been talking to lately, and of course, Dragon Combat Club moving into more of a grassroots designation. We have been talking with people on the ground and passing safety gear to the community. Talking with some of these folks, they may have the privilege to not be in these original ethnic communities, which I think is a travesty, and it's unfortunate, right? That you have to realize where you came from in order to know where you go. Chinatown in New York City was formed well over 300 years ago. As early as the birth of this country, Asian Americans were also located and relocated here into ethnic slums and were just trying to live out their lives. And again, we continue to see this time and time again that, granted, Asians nowadays are considered, or there's a stereotyped as a higher class because they're smart, they maybe make more money, and they're maybe able to escape those slums better than other minority groups, which I don't really think is true, right? But growing up as a kid, I can only speak for myself, right? I grew up, going to Chinatown and Flushing to get groceries. I never lived there, unfortunately, but I always lived around areas where I was not the minority by any means. I was always the part of other ethnic groups, and it came to the understanding that while we are all different, we all still have to look out for each other, just as Milton pointed out, right? A lot of my, I would say, Ivy League friends, they unfortunately leave the city and go to these Ivy League schools, and they forget about where they come from. They forget about how their family got here. And it's unfortunate, right? Once they move out of New York, if they move out of New York, or into middle class or very rich communities, then they have the privilege to not care as much, right? They're so far removed from the situation. But what about where you came from, right? Like your grandparents, your parents, where's your obligation to lineage, to your blood, and to your community, right?
Yeah. And once they move out, right, and we've seen this many, many times, or let's just say they never lived in New York City, or they grew up only in the outskirts of New York City, right? Still not New York City, but outside of New York City. And they stay outside, right? They move from the outskirts to some little Ivy or some little Ivy League. And they hear all these this torrent of microaggressions launched against Asian Americans. And this isn't just coming from MAGA space. This is coming from spaces that are supposed to be progressive, that are supposed to, be against racism. And they take it they take it, they accept it, they regurgitate it, and they spit at us. And it's not something that, you know, they process at a visceral level. They don't understand the harm, the brutality that it leads to. To yell at, you know, an Asian American who's, you know, literally dying and fighting to be heard, you know, to yell at them, ha, you know, you are privileged, you are, you know, white adjacent, Asian, et cetera, you know, et cetera. Like they have no concept that that these things are just very harmful to other Asian Americans, and that they're just projecting their own experiences onto Asian Americans who don't get to live the life that they do. And that's one of the things that us folks living in the city have to understand when we're like, how come nobody hears us? Because the only Asian Americans that get listened to are the ones that make the people in power very quite comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, there's a lot there I agree with, and also with some of the comments that John made. I don't like, one of the things that I find incredibly like difficult to like make sense of and navigate when, I don't know, right? Like there are not that many Asian voices in the media who can like speak for this perspective. And for having like not grown up easy. Because like so much of how we get talked about, and mostly it's getting talked about and not Asian Americans like talking about our own actual experiences. You know, like in mainstream discourse, there's stuff about how like Asians are so privileged, and about how like, you know, discussions about how we're like white adjacent now or whatever. And like this, just the experience, like there are all sorts of ways you can analytically pick a fight with that or whatever, but like that, the visceral personal experience of just having your entire life history erased, your family history, your community history, as if like that shit didn't happen. And I feel this personally, and to some extent in my like professional life, like very much about like this does come from like academic spaces. Like I feel it there, but it has real material effects, because like you can have racially targeted hate crimes happening that are killing people, and they're just rendered invisible in mainstream discourse. Like that's the effect of saying like, well, Asians are so privileged, so like who cares? But one of the like, I don't know, it's just like there are the personal dimensions of that, of just like feeling like, you know, people like who just like tell you that you don't matter to your face, and they think they're saying something like woke or whatever. But like, I think one of the harder parts of dealing with that is also dealing with other Asians who've internalized that. And I've definitely like run into this with friends of mine, and people I like care about. I'm not just saying that like, oh, like I have like friends who've like made mistakes or whatever, but it's like talking about these events as if like drawing attention to them somehow needs to draw attention away from other causes that are also legitimate and also matter, right? Like, well, like you're not getting like systematically like harassed and imprisoned by the police, so like what does it matter if like Asians get targeted? It's like, well, man, like these aren't opposed to each other, right? And there's a way that I feel like a lot of Asian Americans have learned to internalize the sense that like we should take up less space, and if things are happening to us, we shouldn't draw attention to it. And you could argue that comes from a bunch of places, but like it frustrates me here in particular. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if this is something that you guys have seen, but it's something I've run into with friends of mine, just like trying to raise like these issues as things that we should be concerned about.
Nelda, did you have anything?
Yeah, just from, I guess, not from my own experience, but like from what I've observed, like with my friends and things like that, like the whole privilege, model minority, like white adjacent, like, oh yeah, you go to Ivy League, you escape that. I guess, stereotype directed towards Asians. It's like, okay, yeah, some Asians do get to Ivy League and they do get the nice white house and big house in the suburbs with the white picket fence, but like, what about the ones who don't? Because clearly there are some who are still living very, very modest lives and they're not escaping from this, and just using the whole model minority, yes, very educated, yes, elite professionals, like using that stereotype. It really hurts the community as a whole because it allows people to overlook those on the fringes who need the most help. And at the same time, it's also used to so conflict between like other communities, because like, you have your Latino communities and it's like, oh, why can't you be like the Asians? They all go to Ivy Leagues. Why are you like, no, this is wrong? And like, I haven't experienced it firsthand, but I've read about it in New York with like the whole like high school thing, how it's like, oh yeah, specialized high schools, oh, we're gonna now do like more like minority admissions, and like they're just pitting minorities against each other. And I'm like, why can't you just invest more resources to improve school in general? There should be plenty of good schools for everyone, not just like, yeah, we're gonna have you like fight over it now. So
Yeah, Milton actually touched on a good point is like, traditionally these ghettos, these slums have always been low income, right? So the fact that these crimes occur and still occur, with the exception of Christine Lee, who was working in corporate America, a lot of the people who have died in the past 2 years, as well as victims, have been targeted specifically because of the location that they lived in. And then, you say that Asians are also privileged and also high class and high income, but we're still choosing to live in these locations? No, that's really not the point. There is no ability for some of these people to escape poverty, to escape these slums, to move to better areas.
Yeah, I have noticed, the connection between the class and also exposure. I think Michelle, I know that Michelle Lissa Go was a professional, was working sort of in the professional class, right? I think she was born, I know she went to school in Berkeley, came here, and even the location in which she was unfortunately murdered, was it was Times Square, so this was somebody who had many connections and was all, and unfortunately had her life brutally prematurely ended in a space where everyone was, and that was, I believe that was definitely one of the factors that led to the attention that we got. Right, it wasn't good attention, of course, as you know. There have been many people that was, cue all those people coming in saying this is horrible, but this and this will not protect us, and then they're not interested in protecting us. You have people going like, we, defining like, we need like mental health, but never defining how mental health works, talking about these like catchphrases that about for our safety, but once again, never putting that into concrete terms, which is basically our need, thoughts, and prayers. And of course, you also had Christina Unili, who, as John mentioned, was also professional, also well connected. And at the same time, the place she lived was on intersection of Christie Street and Grand Street, and that has unfortunately been the center of many, many different attacks, including attacks that some of us have had to personally stop ourselves, and also attacks that we have seen on the news, and just hope that it doesn't happen to someone else. And while, Christina Unili herself may have had the means to have lived somewhere else, there are plenty of her neighbors, plenty of people who live on her block who don't have the quote unquote privilege to live somewhere else. And furthermore, I think this really shows that you could be well off, you could be well connected, but if you are Asian American, even if you go to even if you do have the means, you are not invincible from this. You are not immune from this, especially in the New York State subway, where You know, a lot of problems of the city, you know, all just happen to get funneled through there, right? And that's the idea. That is exactly what racism is. It doesn't matter what you do. The violence will. You can do all these things to keep yourself safe, to keep yourself moving, but you can't escape it. It's not something that you can escape. You can only fight it, and you can only try to survive it. But it's there, no matter how many people try to minimize it, no matter how many people try to normalize it, or say that it was about something else, to make it about mental health, to make it about homelessness. And before I pass it on, right? Notice the moving goalpost when people talk about this. When COVID first arrived and a lot of Asian Americans were getting attacked, it was, oh, let's not raise too much awareness. It's going to take things, it's going to take the attention, the space away from Black Americans who are suffering. And then come early 2021, throughout the middle of 2021, what did we see? We saw all these Black Americans going like, actually, no, we're not cool with this. Stop Asian hate. You know, let's go and, you know, and so and you would see them denounce anti-Asian racism in sort of this conviction that a lot of our own so-called representatives have failed to. So now they couldn't pull that card out. What card did they switch to? Now it's like, oh, anti-Asian racism is bad, but think about mental illness, but think about homelessness. It's always another marginalized group, another form of suffering that the same racists will pull to use to tell us to shove ours. So yeah, I'll pass it on to Weber.
So I agree with like what Henry said about the shifting goalposts, and I find it really frustrating because like when like politicians, when like news correspondents say things like, oh yeah, we're having these attacks because of homelessness, because of like mental health, like you don't see the city, the state, whatever, you don't see like the governing body, you don't see them using like directing any resources to fight those issues. And especially with mental health, it becomes so much like an individual problem where like, okay, you have an issue, if you don't have insurance, you can't go to a therapist. If you have insurance, that may only cover 2 or 3 sessions. But there's a lot of stigma about it, like, well, if you have mental health, like, you know, you're not right in the brain. And then a lot of the solutions that are being pushed on us are really nonsensical, because like you see the whole like, oh yeah, you have a mental health issue, go take a walk, or like go have a bubble bath, or treat yourself to something nice. And I'm like, that's not helping. And again, as a society, if people are getting attacked, and if let's say like maybe like, okay, homelessness and mental health do play a role in these attacks. I don't know, I haven't really looked at any research, so I'm just speaking hypotheticals, but like, okay, as a society, we should direct resources to address these issues so we can do something to prevent these attacks. But so much is just kind of like individualized, like, yeah, you have a problem, figure it out yourself, we're not going to give you any resources to work with. So if you can't do it, well, too bad. Yeah, pass it on.
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with that. And I think like, it isn't that mental health or poverty or homelessness aren't factors here, but when politicians, whoever's like says like, well, it's because of mental health and that's just really unfortunate, what they mean is it's because of something I don't have to care about, so I don't care. They're not like, because you're totally right? Like they don't say like it's mental health and therefore because we have this mental health crisis, we're going to like massively invest in mental health infrastructure. They don't say like, oh man, look at all of this poverty and homelessness that's leading to a lot of crime and violence. Guess we're going to invest in making sure that homeless people actually have homes and are no longer homeless. That's never what happens. It's just like, oh, it's homelessness. And like, maybe we'll tell the NYPD to stop people from sleeping on trains or whatever, which is obviously not in any way a solution. And it's just a way for people to say like, well, I don't really give a shit. And then obviously there's just the other part that gets very little attention, which is the major element of racism, which is just, that just disappears so quickly. It's a way of shifting the focus and then also just saying, well, can't do anything and just move the news cycle on.
Yeah. So like mental health, like talk of mental health, homelessness, a lot of it has just become a scapegoat. Like, oh yeah, this person has problems. They need to figure that out on their own. Like we're not really going to do anything about it. Yeah.
As someone who's a psychology doctoral student, I've kind of, it really sickens me to see the concept of mental health being sort of misused to sort of as a magic wand to erase problems, or as a magic wand to just say, oh, I have the solution when I don't, when that one person clearly does not have the solution. And it's the automatic jumping point to every time an Asian American gets attacked. For example, um, the murder of Christina Yuna Lee. I was always wondering, how did they jump to the conclusion that how did they jump to the conclusion that he was mentally ill when he was in hospital? Why is that attributed as the main factor and not racism? I mean, there are plenty of people who have mental illness who are in our clubs that would actually stop an attack, right? There are plenty of people with mental illness who don't commit these attacks. And I think that just unfortunately pathologizes many people who have to suffer or deal with them in the very difficult process of living. And furthermore, when you say mental illness, there's the assumption that these attackers don't have control of their actions. When in fact the evidence shows that they do, right? A lot of those times they're scoping out to see if the victim is an easy victim or not, right? They're following people up the flight of stairs, right? That requires planning, right? That requires evaluating whether or not it's safe to attack someone or not, right? And like I said, mental illness exists on a spectrum. But by saying that this is strictly to mental illness, you create this false dichotomy, this assumption that this person had no control over their actions, when in fact, they clearly do.
Yeah, and I was actually talking to the ex-attorney district, ex-assistant district attorney of New York. What's his name? And the person who had committed these crimes is Salman Nash. Pardon if I'm mispronouncing his name. He had been known to be lurking in the area for at least a few years, and we had actually talked to a couple of business owners, and they had said, yeah, he was always like kind of lurking around the area, looking for a warm place to sleep. Was often high on various concoctions. So that's also something else that breaks my heart is why is the Asian community or Asian slums not reporting these kind of incidences in the first place?
I'm just going off of a hunch. Again, no scientific data here, but so let's see how I want to say this. So a lot of Asian communities, maybe I could say they're kind of insular, maybe not, because a lot of times you do have like for me to go there, like I don't speak Mandarin, I don't speak Cantonese, I don't know Korean or anything like that. So I would have to, if I wanted to interact with any of the people there, I have to depend on like, well, do they know English? Do they know anything else? And because a lot of these communities, you have a lot of people who don't speak English, I think it's kind of easy for, it's really easy to ignore them, because if you want to do outreach and if you want to actually go do any sort of like, let's say, social work, field work in those communities, you need to find interpreters, or you need to find like, let's say, social workers with those particular language skills. And I think for the society as a whole, it's like, oh yeah, those communities are insular. They got their own like, stores, their own jobs, their own like, dentists, whatever. Oh yeah, they seem to be doing good. Okay, yeah, it's fine. Like, do they really need help? I don't know. Maybe I can ask, but like, I don't speak that language. They speak English. I don't know. Well, they look like they're doing fine. Okay, I don't think we're like, because of like the language barrier. Sometimes I think like I think it kind of feels like a psychological block that like, oh no, doing work here takes much more, like you actually do outreach here, like it'll take much more effort than going to like already English speaking communities. And same thing when it comes to like reporting, it's like, okay, well, who do I report these issues to? Like whether it be crime or some other concerns, like are there language barriers? And then like, well, if you're reporting, you also run into legal issues such as like, well, do they have a green card? Are they undocumented? Are people scared and concerned? And it's just because of language barriers, I sometimes think that those communities are kind of easy to ignore. Like, yeah, I don't know them. I don't know how to talk to them. Like, they look fine on their own. Like, they can just be there, kind of. Oh yeah, but I will go there and I will go buy like some dim sum and some bubble tea. But yeah, other than that, like, yeah, they look fine on their own. Like, I'm not gonna interact with them. Yeah. I don't know, just kind of like taking a stab at it. Guess I can. Steven wants to say anything.
I don't know. I mean, I can't speak to the particular dynamics of why reporting might be less common in Manhattan, Chinatown, or that. I mean, I just I don't know, and I don't live there. But I mean, if you've ever filed a police report in New York, it's not the most customer friendly experience. It's really not great at all. You're probably going to wait around for a long time. It's probably going to be mildly hostile, and then you're just going to, like, 5 hours later, you're like, well, why the hell what the hell, man? That's it. That's how it is most of the time. How that particularly plays out in these cases, and dealing with people who are sort of hanging around in the area and seem to be hostile and may eventually turn out to be hostile, that I can't speculate on. But and of course there are cultural and language barrier issues that do happen. But
yeah, I agree. Yeah, definitely. There's also this, you mentioned the cultural, you mentioned the language barrier, and that's on top of procedural concerns. What average person knows what the hell to do when they see a person who is struggling, or a person who is clearly like what sketch, or has a combination of mental illness, and is potentially violent, right? What is the default response other than calling the cops? That we don't, that I think society has a good, yes, exactly. Other than that, then we have that, which we have many reasons not to trust. Even Asian Americans, who I understand the media like kind of portrays as, oh, they only seek the police for safety. First of all, that's BS. Second of all, a lot of Asian Americans, for good reason, don't trust the cops anyways, and some do, but many don't, right? And then, of course, recently, with sort of the resurgence of Black Lives Matter in 2020, and and people seeing the horrors of the police, a lot of people are like, great, defund the police. Let's not call 911. Let's think twice before we call 911. Okay. And have you heard, you've heard all these conversations about how not to call the police, right? But think about how often people talk about, I don't know, what alternatives to call to the police, what to do instead, how to take your safety into your own hands, how to keep each other safe. That doesn't get talked about, right? It's the checkbox of police are bad. Okay, that's it, right? But there's no talk about alternatives. There's no talk about, hey, why don't we call, the 888 NYC well, which by the way, which I know that when I volunteered for Sober Hate, they were kind enough to remind us, right? Who knows about that number? We probably do, but what about our friends? What about the folks, who have those language barriers, who have those social barriers, who aren't engaging in these conversations like we are, right? It's like we live in this weird society where people think that the only solutions to safety are A, the police, or B, pretending that we don't have safety problems. and that's why we are where we're at. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
And just want to remind the audience, in the case of Christina Yunali, when she was screaming out for help in her own apartment after she was chased in by her ultimate murderer, they did call the police. They investigated. They came to the door the first time, and actually, the would-be murderer actually like imitated a woman's voice and he said, "Everything's fine. Don't worry about it. Go ahead. You can leave." Right. And so the police were called. They were there. And it was only after, unfortunately, they came back a second time that they had realized that Christina Unalina was murdered and stabbed 40 times. It's unfortunate that, again, people are trying to look for these solutions and aren't finding that the resources or solutions available to them are actually doing them any good at all in the first place. I mean, I guess I'll add, just from a personal note as well, that, every time people who work in this space and are doing grassroots efforts and work just like us, such as Soar Over Hate, like We Are Brave, with They Can't Burn Us All, it's every death that comes down the pipe, it gets so much more draining as well. Like it's unfortunate that we have to have this conversation, right? It's more of a question of not how the next API death will happen. It's when, because we know this is not going to be the end of any of it, right? We're hoping for the best and planning for the worst, which is the reason why we Dragon Combat Club offers free virtual training to the community. And there may be people that don't feel safe leaving out their door. Being able to go out in public. I worry for my mom and my grandma like all the time about stepping outside. And it's unfortunate that we have to live in this constant state of fear. We never know who's going to get attacked next.
The idea that we cannot say if, but that we must ask when. That's how we operate now. We know it will happen again. I think, I don't want to, and I think I don't want to jinx it to say that it's not gonna, I think there is, because there is nobody talking about solutions. Only what isn't a solution. We know that it's going to keep happening. So the way that we've been operating is that we have been just racing against time to equip as many people and train as many people to stop the next potential attack or to prevent it, to stop it. And that's really, it's basically a race. And that's the only, and for me, as a Chinese American who, has family, a fiance I care about, mom, grandma, and many people in the community who I worried might get attacked, who have also, survived their own attacks because they were equipped and trained. That's the only logical path forward, is to treat it like it's going to happen, and to get as many people as you can to build a community that's able to fortify itself against these very vicious attacks.
Any closing thoughts, guys, aside from what Henry just said, or anything that you wanted to get off your chest before we get off here?
And I guess the one thing I want to add to that, I mean, I I definitely agree about just the exhaustion, the feeling of exhaustion that like more of this is definitely coming and you know it, and it weighs on you. But I mean, in a certain sense, like, you know, I think back, like, you know, my mom raised me with a lot of war stories in the sense of like the world being a dangerous place that's not new. But the thing that I find particularly exhausting about all of this is needing to at the same time argue in American, you know, polite, mainstream, predominantly white society, that this is happening at all, and that like we matter as people. When the reaction tends to most commonly be like, well, you know, that's unfortunate anyway. That's a really tricky thing to navigate, and I don't have any sort of easy solution to it, because if there were an easy solution, I think we would have fixed this already. But I think that there's a reason we keep coming back to that theme in this conversation, even when other things obviously matter and other people's stories matter, that like we still have to deal with this problem of like a lot of the people who talk about us and the people who speak for us, you know, like the select number of Asian writers who end up in the New York Times or whatever, you know, end up making arguments that like this isn't really important or isn't really happening, or you know, going as far as saying that Asian Americans aren't even really a group of people at all. I'm still kind of bitter about JKing, but you know, that's a hell of a terrain to try and like deal with this, while at the same time you've got like real material threats to deal with. So I don't have any solution to that, but that's just kind of where my head's at right now about feeling the weight of all of that.
I'm just kind of really frustrated by, like, at the end of the day, just like the senselessness of it all. Because like I understand if you think back to 2 years ago, you think to like COVID lockdowns, the beginnings of the pandemic, when people didn't really know how to approach COVID, and like what to do to like avoid it or how to treat it. It really affected a lot of people. Like it touched them in their lives a lot of time in negative ways. And like I know like everyone lost something, whether it's loved ones or like work issues or like housing, income. Like I know a lot of people are angry, but like at the end of the day, hitting someone over the head or pushing them in front of a train, like it won't change any of this. Like it won't make COVID go away. And like that person that was just like hurt, like they're not personally responsible for any of this. So I find there's just like a lot of senseless and misdirected like violence and anger. And like I get it, people are upset, but like it's not being channeled to do anything productive. And a lot of people are like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, we don't need to deal with it, they'll find their own outlet. But like just this violence is like really senseless and unnecessary, because like I said, pushing someone in front of a train or stabbing them won't make all of your problems go away.
Yeah, and there's so much fear. Again, I can only speak for home, right, for New York City. You know, there's so much fear not only from API women and elderly, but also women in general. Like, I remember riding the subway yesterday, and all of the women were basically back up and sat, you know, stood against the wall, like as far away from the tracks as they could. So it's not just, you know, the targeting specifically of API women and elderly, but also the impacts that women all over the city feel uneasy and feel unsafe, right? You know, Dragon Comic Club was always meant to be a short-term solution to a long-term problem, and everyone has the right and ability to defend themselves if that need arises, and that's what we hope to help and bring to the community. But you have to be aware of what is going on. The uneasiness from everyone in this city is kind of at an all-time high, as well as, you know, all over the country as well. Milda, did you have a follow-up?
Um, Kind of, yeah, because I remember like growing up in New York City as a kid, it's always like, oh yeah, don't go to this neighborhood, don't stay out too late, don't do this, don't do that. And it's like, okay, I'm relatively safe. But now like the same sort of like, I guess, crimes that were happening, like that were only restricted to certain places or at only like at certain times of the night. Now they're happening everywhere and during like all times of the day. So I'm like, yeah, that thing I was taught as a kid, like don't go there, don't stay out too late, that doesn't really apply anymore. So, and it doesn't seem like like society, like they just want to, like, I mean, politicians and stuff, organizations, a lot of them, they just want to talk and be like, oh yes, this is too bad. So I kind of do agree that at the end of the day, like we do need to take more of like a community initiative for it in terms of like community safety and things like that.
I guess with that, again, this is not something that we want to be talking about. And again, it shouldn't have happened in the first place. Unfortunately, the precursors were there. There was a natural escalation into victims of AAPI and, Stop Asian Hate and anti-Asian crimes happening all over the country and all over the world as well. We are constantly trying to better understand why these causes are happening in the first place. But again, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of understanding to be able to continue to do this. So, for everyone here and everyone else that has had a chance to participate last week, again, just want to thank you all for your contributions as well as your unique views into these problems. And we'll talk about another topic next week. But this is an ongoing issue, and I'm sure this will come up in other fireside chats. Feel free to join us. Like, comment, subscribe. And we'll talk to you soon. Thank you all for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.